This is a section taken from the extended edition of my series, What is the Age of the Ring mod? The Age of the Ring Total Overhaul mod for the classic RTS game The Battle for Middle-earth Rise of the Witch King has a ton going for it, so let's take a look at smaller aspects of it at a glance. Like a quick flyby of many of the key features of the Gondor overhaul from Men of the West. We begin this extended series on the factions with the Men of the West faction of Vanilla, and how Age of the Ring massively overhauls it. Both factions are designed as jack-of-all-trades geared to introducing new players to these games, so it's an appropriate starting place. But both factions are incredibly strong factions to play for any skill level, of course. The fundamental difference between the two is that Vanilla takes the best of Gondor and bits of Rohan from BFME 1 and combines them together as one faction with a homogeneous playstyle, whereas Age of the Ring keeps them their own separate factions with their own distinct identities and playstyles. That being said, Rohan will be covered in the next episode. Before we get to the main material on the faction's overhaul, let's take a moment to appreciate some of the art overhauls. In Vanilla, units and battalions will have the same faces, and the armor isn't film accurate, especially when applying heavy armor upgrades. While work has been done over the years to make textures better, they still very much retain the older graphics. Age of the Ring gives a welcome update on this front. Like with all factions, units have more personality and individuality, many having different faces, and when units get armor upgrades, it's not just a change to a golden colored skin as in Vanilla. Rather, the armor is actually placed on and is strikingly film accurate. When it comes to small details like banners, in Vanilla it's only ever one banner for all Gondor units, but inaccurately represented as blue and white. In Age of the Ring, the banners are individualized for all the Gondorian units based on where they come from in that wide nation, either the fiefdoms like Lamadon, Linhir, Morthond, Lasarnak, or Pinneth Gelen. You also now get a Minas Tirith banner that is accurately silver on sable, not blue, and the Fountain Guard has its own special banner. The Knights of Dol Amroth now proudly bear the Silver Swan, and the Dol Amroth ground troops have their own version. Vanilla's structures are solid enough, being pretty accurate to Weta's designs, though maybe a tad bit less refined in the brickwork. Structures are fairly utilitarian and straightforward, though are kinda quiet, without much activity going on. In AOTR, the structure art is more refined and advanced looking. There's more activity in some of them, such as troops training in the barracks, the mason chiseling away in the new stoneworker building, and engineers building trebuchets at the workshop. And certain structures, like the farm, have variations on workers too. You'll also notice that many of the designs reflect or are very much inspired by Weta's designs, even while the developers have made their own original art. This preserves a sense of continuity and authenticity within the world being portrayed. Now, getting back to the overhauls to the Vanilla Men of the West faction for AOTR's Gondor. Both factions play relatively similarly and are strong hero factions, with many of these heroes being iconic, but AOTR has a bigger roster of heroes, with some being only from the books, and these replace all Rohan-related heroes to keep Gondor, well, Gondor. But because of the radical change to the attribute modifier system, the number of heroes with leaderships means Gondor can divide these or concentrate them amongst your troops with far greater power than in Vanilla. A specific example of this is how you can buff your Swan Knights with your hero Imrahil. Speaking of which, there are now not just one heroic unit as in Vanilla, the Swan Knights, but also now the Fountain Guards. These look much like Vanilla's Tier 2 Tower Guards, but play vastly differently, with many new abilities. Furthermore, in Vanilla, the Men of the West have 3 Tier 2 units, the Tower Guards, Rohirrim, and the Rangers of Ithilien, all immediately accessible upon upgrading their respective structures. The Rohirrim are naturally some of the best cavalry in the game, with the ability to toggle between sword and spear to boot, but are very expensive. Notice the vanilla version of the faction lacks a Tier 2 swordsman unit though, but the Tier 2 spearmen and archers more than make up for this loss. This puts the faction above many other factions in vanilla in terms of archers and anti-cavalry, but at the cost that the tower guards move very slowly, and the rangers have extremely low armor and are very expensive. Whereas in AOTR, its rangers are Tier 3 or elite units and are locked behind the recruitment of Faramir, but for good reason. They now have armor-piercing upgraded arrows and can toggle between sword and bow. And their swords give them a massive armor boost, made only better by stacking with Faramir's leadership. As for cavalry, Gondor's Tier 2 Cav may not have sword and bow swapping capability as Vanilla's Rohirrim, but are quite highly armored and have a special unit formation which lets them plow through enemy ranks with ease. This is made all the better by Faramir's leadership when on horseback. You can see in this there is another new mechanic for Age of the Ring, trample deceleration. The higher the negative percentage, the less your cavalry will slow down when trampling enemies, letting your cavalry trample more and escape through larger crowds easier. While not new in the strictest sense, it being in vanilla, the mechanic was always in the background in vanilla and not an overt feature. In this, it can play a big part in gameplay. Trample deceleration stacks in Age of the Ring, it does not in vanilla. In AOTR, it's also important to note that most factions will have Tier 1 and 2 units for cavalry, spearmen, archers, and swordsmen to keep all factions evened out a bit more, and this includes Gondor. Whereas in vanilla, 4 of the 7 factions have only 1 or 2 Tier 2 infantry units total each, though may make up for this loss in other interesting ways. You'll also notice that Gondor has a second Tier 1 swordsman unit, locked behind an AOTR hero, reflecting something else from the books quite nicely by the way. These are another different type of unit available in AOTR, but not so much in vanilla, the anti-structure unit, which are also somewhat rare across various factions, and are typically axe-wielding units. So the aforementioned faction-specific Tier 3 or elite unit and semi-heroic unit types are what set certain factions apart a bit more in AOTR compared to vanilla. Some factions in AOTR, like Gondor, do not have a semi-heroic unit at all, but make up for it in other ways. For example, there is a unique spellbook power, the Dol Amroth Citadel, which lets you recruit the Men-at-Arms unit, which have powerful buffs for your Tier 1 units. These special support units are best used in conjunction with the Sworn Allegiance spellbook power, which spams out your Tier 1 troops automatically with armor upgrades. So in AOTR, you can see that spellbook variety can be much more faction-specific to each faction, and include a lot more nuance than, say, simply adding buffs or having hard-hitting powers, as is the case for many of the faction spellbooks in vanilla. And you can again see the developer's storytelling philosophy in how they treat Dol Amroth as a sub-faction for Gondor, reflecting how that princedom came to Gondor's aid in the war, but came in later, though with dramatic impact. Also of note in this comparison, the developers took away a lot of the big splashy AoE powers from vanilla, like the Army of the Dead. They instead, like mentioned earlier, wanted to tell a story with the factions and incorporate powers that not only made sense for the factions, but also seemed unique to the factions. To reflect this, spellbook powers typically do not get copied across the factions as they do in vanilla. For instance, they divided up vanilla's Men of the West into Gondor and Rohan, just like as in BFME 1, but in AOTR, neither faction has Aragorn as a recruitable hero you can level up. Instead, Aragorn is available as a permanent summon from Gondor's 25 PP spellbook power, aptly named The Return of the King, which also appropriately replaces Vanilla's Earthquake power, because what does an earthquake have to do with Gondor? Aragorn, renamed here Elisar, is automatically at level 10, comes with a complement of elite guard units, and has a powerful unit buff, amongst his healing and sword abilities. Basically everything vanilla Aragorn has, but with way better results and better stats, being one of the toughest heroes in the game. And the Army of the Dead, as mentioned a moment ago, is taken away, replaced by a powerful anti-structure Eagle's power, but is retained in Aragorn's Oathbreaker ability. While not the OP monstrosity of Vanilla's spellbook power, as seen here, or the redundant level 10 ability of Vanilla Aragorn here, it still packs quite a punch while not being overboard and maintains the character's connection to an important part of his story. That's just a quick flyby of many of the key overhauls of this faction, so let's do a bit of a closer look, comparing to vanilla along the way, starting with the units. If you haven't already, by the way, why not download this amazing mod? It's fast, free, and as easy as one click. Download link is in the description, and I have a great installation guide on my channel here.